Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about something that's, well, it's like a bug in your operating system. A really persistent, almost invisible glitch that hits even the best leaders, and it quietly just sabotages everything you're trying to build. So let's run a diagnostic on your system, shall we?
Now, I want you to be really honest with yourself here. When you give a direction, when you lay out a vision, do you truly believe your team gets it exactly as you see it in your head? Because, most leaders just assume that because the words came out of their mouth, the communication was a success. And that right there, that is a catastrophic error in judgment.
Look, the source material pulls no punches on this one. That feeling you have of being perfectly clear, it's actually a cognitive bias. It's called the curse of knowledge. And it's the real reason you're seeing all this weird variation and messiness in how your team executes. It's not that you're bad at explaining things, it's that you're running on buggy software.
Okay, so let's really diagnose this thing. This isn't about a personal failure, right? It's a systemic glitch in how we all think about communication. Let's call it the high bandwidth delusion, where we just believe our message is being received in perfect, crystal clear, high definition.
And here it is. This is the name of the bug. Assumed understanding. It's this quiet delusion that speaking is the same as communicating, but it's not. Real communication only happens when the person on the other end has perfectly reconstructed the exact same mental model that you intended to send. Anything less is a critical processing error.
This analogy is just perfect for understanding the problem. Think about it. In your head, you've got this stunning, high-resolution 4K map of what you want to achieve. It's vivid, it's detailed. But when you try to send that map using just your words, you're compressing that entire 4K file down into a grainy, choppy 144p video stream. Just a massive, massive amount of data gets lost.
And this is the complete paradigm shift you have to make. We've all been taught that leadership is about charisma, big speeches, persuasion. But for a high-stakes organization, an empire, it's got nothing to do with that. It's about engineering. It's about building a system for pure, lossless, high-fidelity signal transmission. This is a technical problem, not a soft skill.
So, let's talk about how this little bug spirals into total system failure. Because every tiny bit of data that gets lost, it adds up. It creates something called translation debt. And believe me, that debt has a very, very real cost.
Every single time your vision gets passed from one person to the next, each person is a human node, the signal degrades. It loses resolution. It's literally information entropy playing out in your organization. And this loss, it accumulates, just like financial debt, until it completely cripples your team's ability to execute anything with precision.
So what does this translation debt actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon? Well, it looks like this. Your people are all working from slightly different versions of the plan. The final product comes back and it's a distorted mess that barely resembles your original blueprint. And you're stuck in what's called a low protocol state, operating without any standardized system for getting on the same page.
Let's just put a number on this pain to make it really concrete. The source material estimates that leaders are spending up to 40%. That's 40% of their week on cleanup duty. That's just correcting mistakes, re-explaining things, and fixing problems that all came from that first bad signal. We're talking 2 full days a week just wasted. You are just leaking bandwidth.
And that brings us to this incredibly powerful metaphor. See, without a shared high-fidelity communication protocol, the higher you try to build, the more everyone starts speaking a different language. And eventually, the whole thing just crumbles under the weight of its own confusion. You think you're building a unified empire, but what you're really building is a Tower of Babel.
Okay, so that's the problem. And yeah, it's pretty dire. But there is a solution, and it involves a radical shift from just using words to becoming an architect of a shared reality for your entire team.
Here's the end goal: zero loss transmission. That's what we're aiming for. And you get there by building a shared mental model. This is a state where your team's understanding of the goal, the constraints, the trade-offs, everything perfectly mirrors what's in your head. Not close, not similar, a perfect mirror.
So how do you build this shared model? You do it through something called a context dump. And this is the absolute highest form of leadership communication. It's not about giving instructions. It's about transferring the entire physics of the decision, the deep why behind it, all the real-world constraints you're working with, and even the potential ripple effects down the line.
This slide really lays out the choice you have. On one side, you've got micromanagement.
That's where you're just giving out little low-context instructions, which means you have to constantly be checking in and correcting course. Or you can aim for autonomous alignment. You provide that deep context, and in doing so, you empower your people to make smart, aligned decisions on their own because they see the whole picture.
All right, let's get down to brass tacks. We've talked about the problem, we've talked about the goal. Now let's talk about the actual, practical, 3-step protocol you can install to upgrade your entire team's communication OS. This is it, the Sync protocol. I want you to think of this like a software patch for your leadership style. It's built around 3 core functions that are designed to get you to that zero-loss communication we talked about. So let's just quickly run through these. Step 1, the definition of done standard. This just means you never ever assign a task without painting a super high-resolution, crystal-clear picture of what finished actually looks like. Step 2, context dumping. You have to get all the assumptions, all the variables, all the trade-offs out of your head and onto the table for everyone to see. And finally, step 3, high-fidelity feedback loops. This is crucial. You close the circuit. You have your team explain the model back to you in their own words to prove they've reconstructed it perfectly. If you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Your mind operates at incredibly high bandwidths. The problem isn't your vision. The problem is the faulty, low-bandwidth transmission protocol you've been using to share it. It's time to stop letting your best ideas get lost in translation.
And I want to leave you with this last thought from the source material because it's so powerful. True leadership, true sovereignty, it isn't about talking more or being a better persuader. It's about becoming a master at systematically encoding context and then transmitting it with absolute flawless fidelity.
So, as we wrap up, the real question isn't if you should do this, it's where are you going to start? What's the very first project, the first team, the first system inside your empire that you are going to upgrade by installing the communication protocol? Give that some real thought.
You know that feeling, right? If you're a leader, you've definitely felt this. You have this brilliant, crystal-clear vision in your head. You lay it all out for your team, but by the time it gets to them for execution, it's fuzzy, it's distorted, and you're stuck in this draining cycle of correcting and realigning. But what if I told you the problem isn't your team? What if it's not even you? What if it's the system itself? This quote, man, it just flips the whole problem on its head. It's not about being a bad communicator. It's a technical problem. It's saying you're trying to run this incredibly complex operation using a language that just wasn't built for it. You're operating with a low protocol system. And the cost, it's just staggering. A lot of leaders are spending a whopping 40% of their week on what's called cleanup duty. Think about that. That's 2 full days, every single week, just spent fixing small misalignments, clarifying things, and just getting the train back on the tracks. All because that first message got a little bit scrambled. So we're not just talking about wasted time here. This is a constant drain on your most important resource, your focus. And this friction, it has a name. It has a specific cause. It's this kind of debt that just piles up over time. And understanding it, well, that's the first step to finally fixing it. And this thing, it has a name. It's called translation debt. The best way to think about it is like making a photocopy of a photocopy. Every single time your vision gets passed down, from you to a director, to a manager, to the person actually doing the work, it loses a little bit of data, a little bit of context. And that debt just keeps adding up until you have a massive gap between your vision and what actually gets done. Okay, so if the symptom is translation debt, what's the actual diagnosis? Well, it's being low protocol. This isn't about your team not listening. It's a failure of the signal itself. It means we haven't built a system that's designed for high-fidelity information transfer. This right here just perfectly sums it up. In your mind, the plan is this beautiful, high-resolution 4K map. You see every single detail, every single nuance, but you're trying to send it over this low-bandwidth channel, just talking. And what your team gets is a grainy, pixelated 144p video. Sure, the basics are there, but all that critical detail, it's gone. And look, this isn't just some clever metaphor. This is a real thing, a fundamental principle from systems thinking called information entropy. It's the literal scientific reason your 4K vision degrades to 144p. It basically says that anytime a signal passes through a medium, and your team is the medium, it's going to degrade. It's inevitable. Unless you have a protocol to fight it. So this information entropy, it starts this domino effect. It's a predictable and pretty destructive chain reaction. Let's walk through the 3 stages of how this breakdown actually happens. First up, that entropy leads to something called context fragmentation. Now, every person on your team is working off a slightly different, slightly incomplete version of the plan. They're all running from different scripts, and each one is missing these crucial pieces of the why behind the what. And all of that, it leads to the final inevitable outcome: total systemic drift. The whole project, maybe even the whole company, just slowly but surely drifts away from that original blueprint. And eventually the thing you end up with looks nothing like that beautiful 4K vision you started with. Wow, I mean, what a powerful way to put it. If you don't have a shared communication protocol, scaling your company just makes the problem worse. The higher you try to build, the more the language breaks down, until the whole thing just collapses under the weight of its own confusion. Okay, so that's the bad news. But here's the good news. There is a way to fix this. It just requires a shift in your thinking. You have to stop just talking at people and start intentionally architecting a shared mental model across your entire team. You know, the old school way of thinking was that leadership is all about persuasion, about giving these great, inspiring speeches. But this new model, it treats it like an engineering problem. Your job as a leader isn't just to inspire, it's to make sure you're transmitting a signal with 0 data loss. It's a technical job. So the real goal here, it's to build a system where every single person on your team is looking at the exact same 4K map that you are. It's about architecting a shared reality, not just barking out orders. Okay, so how do we actually do this? How do we build this shared reality? Well, the framework for it is called the Sync Protocol. You can think of it like an installation guide for a brand new communication operating system for your team, one that's designed specifically to wipe out translation debt. It all boils down to 3 core steps. It's a pretty straightforward procedure, really. First, you define exactly what the end looks like. Second, you give them all the underlying reasons why. And third, you check to make sure the message landed perfectly. Let's break them down. Step 1 is all about getting crystal clear on the destination. You never ever assign a task without what's called a high-resolution success metric. Bottom line, if your team member can't picture the finished product with the exact same clarity that you can, the communication has already failed. Step 2 is maybe the most important part: context dumping. This is where you go way beyond the what and explain the why. You're basically giving your team the physics of the decision. You don't just tell them what to do, you tell them the #1 priority, what they're allowed to sacrifice to get it done, and the one critical, expensive error they absolutely have to avoid. This gives them the power to make smart decisions on their own. And finally, step 3, you've got to close the loop. Look, communication isn't about sending a message. It's about the receiver being able to perfectly reconstruct your idea. So you ask them to explain it back to you. The plan, the priorities, the goal, all in their own words. If they're even 10% off, you fix it, you calibrate right then and there. Now, when you get this right, when you successfully install this protocol, your whole role as a leader fundamentally changes. You stop being a manager of people's tasks, and you start becoming an architect of outcomes. And the payoff is huge. Just look at this. You move away from that exhausting, soul-crushing cycle of micromanagement and cleanup duty, and you get to this incredible state of autonomous alignment. Your team can operate independently, but because they all share your mental model, they move in perfect sync. And the ultimate benefit for you, it's something called neural silence. By getting rid of all that constant noise of misalignment and correction, you free up so much mental bandwidth. You can finally stop worrying about today's little problems and start focusing on tomorrow's strategy. You can actually think 3 steps ahead. So, it all comes down to this one last question for you. Take a hard look at how your organization communicates. Is it an architecture of clarity, built to scale? Or is it just a messy patchwork of assumptions, pretty much doomed to collapse? Are you building an empire or a Tower of Babel? Because the choice of protocol is really up to you. All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to explore a really different way of thinking about communication. We're not talking about it as some kind of soft skill, but as a crucial piece of system architecture. This is the Sync Protocol, a method designed to make sure ideas get transmitted with perfect, high-fidelity, zero-loss clarity within any team. Or, as the source material puts it, any empire. So let's kick things off with a pretty radical idea. Most of us think leadership is all about persuasion, giving these big, inspiring speeches. But what if that's just wrong? The whole idea behind this protocol is that true leadership isn't about being a great orator. It's about the precise, accurate transfer of information. It's much more of an engineering problem than a poetry slam. Okay, so the core problem we're trying to solve here is a fundamental bug in our mental software, in our neural OS. The source material calls it the assumed understanding delusion. And trust me, it's a catastrophic processing error that torpedoes even our best intentions. And this bug has a name you've probably heard of, the curse of knowledge. It's this cognitive bias where, because the plan is perfectly clear in your mind, you just assume that clarity magically transfers over when you speak. But here's the hard truth. Just because the words came out of your mouth does not mean you've actually communicated, not even close. Think about it like this. This visualizes the data loss perfectly. In your head, you're holding this gorgeous, crystal clear 4K mental map of what needs to happen. But then you try to send that massive file over a grainy 144p verbal channel. What do you think happens? An inevitable and massive loss of resolution. What your team actually gets is a blurry, pixelated, barely recognizable version of your original vision. And look, this isn't just a small misunderstanding we're talking about. When you scale this up, this ambiguity creates two huge problems: systemic drift and something the source calls translation debt. You'll quickly find out that your entire operation is only as fast as its slowest, fuzziest handshake. So what exactly is translation debt? Well, think of it like that game of telephone you played as a kid. Every single time your vision passes from you to a team lead, and from that lead to their team, it loses data, it degrades. This is information entropy in action. Each person, each human node in the system, gets a slightly different, lower resolution version of the plan. And the cost of this? Oh, it is absolutely staggering. According to the source, leaders spend, on average, 40% of their week on cleanup duty. Think about that. That is 2 full days. 2 days a week spent just correcting misalignments, re-explaining things, and fixing mistakes that happened simply because the team didn't have the deep context from the get-go. And if you don't fix this, what's the ultimate terrifying outcome? This quote just says it all. Without a shared high-fidelity protocol, the bigger you get, the more your communication breaks down. You think you're scaling an aligned organization, but what you're really building is a Tower of Babel, destined to collapse under the weight of its own confusion. But here's the good news. There is a solution. A new architecture designed specifically for zero-loss transmission. The goal of this whole protocol is to shift away from that top-down, soul-crushing micromanagement to a totally new paradigm: autonomous alignment. This is what we call the refactored transmission. So how do we do it? The absolute heart of this protocol is something called the context dump. Now, this isn't about telling people what to do. It's about giving them the physics of the decision. You give them the why behind the mission, you tell them the real constraints they're working with, and you help them see the potential third-order consequences of their actions. You're not just giving a task, you're giving them your entire mental model. And this slide just nails the paradigm shift, right? On one side, you have micromanagement. That's just giving orders, the content, with none of the reasoning. But on the other side, you have autonomous alignment. That's about providing the deep context that empowers your team to make smart, independent decisions that are already perfectly in sync with the master plan. And when you adopt this approach, it leads to what the source calls asynchronous dominance. Your vision is no longer just some passing comment in a meeting. It becomes documented, it's searchable, it's indisputable. And maybe the best benefit for you? It creates neural silence. It frees up your mental bandwidth so you can stop putting out fires and actually start thinking 3 moves ahead. Okay, so we've established the architecture, the shared reality. Now we have to translate these big ideas into a concrete, practical protocol you can actually use. This is the sync engine for your empire. The sync engine runs on a super simple 3-step process. First, the definition of done. Standard. You never, ever assign a task without a super specific, high-resolution metric for what success looks like. Second, the context dumping rule. Before anyone even starts working, you lay out all the assumptions and critical variables. And third, and this is key, you run high-fidelity feedback loops. You ask your team to reflect the model back to you, to explain it in their own words, to make damn sure the transmission was successful. Which brings us to a final critical question for you. After seeing the real costs of low-fidelity communication and the incredible potential of getting it right, are you going to keep just talking at your team and hoping for the best? Or are you ready to step up and architect the communication systems that will guarantee your vision gets executed with zero loss? The choice is yours.
Okay, so let me ask you something. Have you ever had this perfectly clear vision in your head, right? A razor-sharp 4K image of exactly what needs to be done, only to watch your team deliver something that looks, well, blurry. kind of out of focus? It is one of the single most frustrating things for any high performer. Today, we're going to dig into why this happens and, more importantly, lay out a protocol to fix it for good. See, the problem isn't that you're bad at explaining things. The issue is a tricky cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge. It's simple, really. When you know something inside and out, it becomes almost impossible to remember what it felt like not to know it. So, you end up skipping steps, using jargon, and just assuming everyone else sees the same high-def picture you've got in your head.
And this right here, this visualizes the problem perfectly. You're holding this incredible 4K mental model, but when you try to explain it, you're compressing it. You're pushing it through a low-bandwidth channel, your words. And what's the result? A massive loss of data. Your team gets this grainy, pixelated 144p version of your idea and is somehow expected to build a masterpiece from it. It's just not going to happen.
So let's put a formal name to this. The source material calls it the assumed understanding delusion. And it's described as a catastrophic error in a leader's neural OS, your brain's operating system. It's the simple but incredibly dangerous belief that just because you said the words, you've actually communicated successfully.
The specific glitch that causes this is called the semantic bug. It's this deep-seated flaw in our thinking that makes us equate speaking with understanding. But true communication has nothing to do with what you send out. It has everything to do with what the other person receives and how accurately they can rebuild your mental model in their own mind.
All right, so we've identified the bug, but what's the real cost here? Well, having a low-protocol way of communicating has some serious cascading consequences. And that brings us to this powerful concept, translation debt. Think about it like that game of telephone you played as a kid. Every single time your vision gets passed from you to a director, and from that director to a manager, and from that manager to their team, it loses a little more data, a little more resolution. This debt just keeps piling up, distorting the vision more and more with each step.
So what's the tangible cost of all this debt? Well, check out this number. A staggering 40% of a leader's week is often spent on what's called cleanup duty. Think about that. That's 2 full days. Every single week, we sit on correcting mistakes, realigning the team, and re-explaining things that should have been crystal clear from the start.
And over the long run, all that translation debt and cleanup duty leads to something called systemic drift. All those tiny, seemingly harmless misalignments, they all add up, they compound, and they slowly pull the entire project or even the whole company off course. Before you know it, the final result looks absolutely nothing like the original blueprint you had in your mind.
So, how in the world do we fix this? Well, the solution requires a huge shift in how we think about communication. We have to move away from just talking at our team and move towards consciously architecting a shared mental model, a shared reality for everyone to operate inside of.
This is the new paradigm. We're moving away from micromanagement and towards autonomous alignment. Instead of giving people a list of commands, you give them context and constraints. You're basically explaining the physics of the decision-making environment. This empowers your team to make the right choices on their own, because they actually understand the deep why behind the work. And this is where the SYNC protocol comes into play. It's a 3-step framework laid out in this source material, and it's designed specifically to squash that semantic bug and make sure your ideas are transmitted with zero loss in quality.
Okay, here they are, the 3 core steps we're about to break down. It's a really clear, actionable process. You define the end state, you dump all the necessary context, and then you verify the transmission was successful. Simple.
First up, the definition of done. The rule here is simple but non-negotiable. Never ever give someone a task without a high-resolution success metric. You have to kill all ambiguity. If your team member cannot visualize what finished looks like with the exact same clarity as you, then the communication has already failed before they've even started.
Step 2 is the context dumping rule. This is all about getting those hidden assumptions out of your head and onto the table. Before any work starts, you have to provide the key variables. What is the real priority? What trade-offs are we willing to make? And maybe most importantly, what is the one big, expensive mistake that we absolutely have to avoid? This forces you to make your implicit knowledge totally explicit.
And finally, we have what might be the most crucial step of all, the high-fidelity feedback loop. You ask your team member to reflect the model back to you, in their own words. Now, this isn't a test, it's a system check. If their understanding of the plan is even 10% different from yours, you don't move on. You stop, and you calibrate right then and there, before a single second or a single dollar is wasted.
You can think of it like a
handshake in computer networking. You know, it's that little protocol that two devices use to establish a connection and agree on how they're going to talk to each other. In an organization, every single instruction is a handshake, and the speed and efficiency of your entire empire is limited by the quality of its slowest handshake.
So, let's bring it all together. The big takeaway from all this is simple. Real leadership at scale isn't about giving great speeches. It's not about being a charismatic orator. It's about being a systems architect. It's about designing robust, reliable protocols that ensure crystal-clear communication flows through your organization like water.
And that brings us to the final question I want you to really think about. Take a hard look at your own team, your own organization. Are you guys just talking, just throwing words around and hoping the message gets through? Or are you consciously, deliberately architecting a shared reality where everyone is perfectly, completely in sync? Because that difference, well, it's everything.